I'm James Dobish, the Maintenance Support Manager on the M9 9mm pistol. The presentation you're about to see runs concurrent with the operator's technical manual. In this presentation, I will talk to you about operation and characteristics, clearing, disassembly, cleaning and lubrication, inspection, assembly, safety function check. Accompanying this tape is a copy of the operator's layout mat for the M9. These mats will also be issued one per weapon at the time of the fielding. The procedures which will be shown in this tape were filmed indoors. Therefore, firing the pistol will be simulated using dummy ammunition. Firing the pistol without ammunition, also known as dry firing, is only to be done in conjunction with preventive maintenance checks and services, or PMCS, when performing the safety function checks and during this training session. As with any weapon, safety is of utmost concern. Before performing any maintenance or inspection on the pistol, ensure that it has been cleared. During this tape, you will be cautioned or warned when performing certain procedures. Pay close attention to these to prevent injury to yourself or others and to preclude loss of parts or damage to the pistol. To start, let's talk about the operation and characteristics of the M9. The M9 pistol is a semi-automatic, magazine-fed, recoil-operated, double-action pistol chambered for the 9mm cartridge. Some features unique to the M9 pistol are: for double action, pulling the trigger will cock the hammer and immediately release it, discharging the first chambered round. To fire the first chambered round in single action, the hammer must be manually locked to the rear before pulling the trigger. All shots after the first one will be fired in single action because the slide automatically recocks the hammer after each shot. The magazine has a 15-round capacity. Additionally, there are holes in the back of the magazine, so the rounds remaining can be observed by the operator. When there is a round in the chamber, the upper surface of the extractor protrudes from the right side of the slide. In the dark, the protrusion can be felt by touch. The loaded chamber indicator should be used in a combat environment where visual inspection of the chamber is not desirable and stealth must be maintained. When the trigger is not pulled, the firing pin block secures the firing pin and prevents it from moving forward even if the pistol is dropped. A potential safety hazard exists if the firing pin block is missing or does not return flush with the slide surface after firing. The decocking safety lever allows for safe operation of the pistol by both right and left-handed users and lowers the hammer without causing an accidental discharge. The pistol is shown with the decocking safety lever in the fire or up position. When the hammer is cocked, it may be safely lowered by moving the decocking safety lever to the safe or down position. The safety decocking lever can be accidentally moved to the fire or up position with a minimum amount of force. This could happen during removal of the pistol from the holster if carried in the safe or down position and/or during careless handling. The lanyard loop is compatible with standard lanyards in the Army supply system. The front and back straps of the grip are vertically grooved to ensure a firm grip even with wet hands or under conditions of rapid combat fire. The trigger guard is extended and the concave forward portion is grooved for a firm grip when using two hands or gloves. The disassembly lever and disassembly button allows for quick field stripping and, at the same time, prevents accidental disassembly. The slide stop holds the slide to the rear after the last cartridge is fired. It can also be manually operated. order to clear the M9 pistol, place the decocking safety lever in the safe or down position. Depress the magazine release button to remove the magazine from the pistol. With the pistol pointing in a safe direction, grasp the slide serrations and fully retract the slide to remove the chambered cartridge. Lock the slide to the rear using the slide stop and visually inspect the chamber to ensure that it is empty. Do not place your fingers in the open chamber. After clearing the pistol, we will now field strip it by doing the following. Allow the slide to return fully forward by depressing the slide stop. Hold the pistol in your right hand with the muzzle slightly elevated. With your forefinger, press the disassembly lever release button and, with your thumb, rotate the disassembly lever downward until it stops. Pull the slide and barrel assembly forward and remove it with your fingers wrapped around the forward slide and barrel assembly. Do not allow the hammer to fall with full force by pulling the trigger when the slide is removed, as damage to the receiver will occur. If the hammer is accidentally cocked after the slide has been removed, the hammer must be manually lowered. Lay down the receiver assembly and use extreme care when removing the recoil spring and recoil spring guide. Due to the amount of compression, the assembly will be released under high spring tension and could cause possible injury to personnel and/or become damaged or lost. With the slide and barrel assembly turned bottom facing up, slightly compress the recoil spring and spring guide while, at the same time, lifting and removing the recoil spring and recoil spring guide. Allow the recoil spring to stretch slowly. Separate the recoil spring from the recoil spring guide. Place both on the layout mat. Push in on the locking block plunger while pushing the barrel slightly forward. Lift and remove the locking block and barrel assembly from the slide. Place both the barrel and slide assemblies on the layout mat. Remove any cartridges from the magazine. Grasp the magazine firmly with the floor plate up and the back of the magazine tube against the palm of the hand. To remove the floor plate, use the barrel locking block plunger. By depressing the locking block plunger will protrude and can be used to assist in removal of the floor plate. The pointed end of a 9mm cartridge can also be used to remove the floor plate if the floor plate has a chamfer around the hole. Release the floor plate by pushing down on the floor plate retainer stud in the center of the floor plate. At the same time, slide the floor plate forward for a short distance using the thumb. While maintaining pressure with your thumb on the magazine spring, remove the floor plate from the magazine tube. Remove the floor plate retainer, magazine spring, and follower from the magazine tube. Then remove the floor plate retainer and follower from the magazine spring. This completes the operator disassembly of the M9 pistol. No further disassembly is authorized. Use the equipment shown here to clean the M9. Use these POL products to clean and/or lubricate the M9. A copy of this chart is included with this tape. For purposes of this film, the time shown in cleaning and lubrication, the M9 pistol is greatly reduced. Normal cleaning and lubricating will actually be much longer. For hard to clean areas on the M9, use the cleaning brush, better known as the toothbrush. The bore brush is for cleaning the bore only. Use of the bore brush on any other part of the pistol will damage the protective finish. Clean the slide assembly with a clean cloth. A soft brush and CLP can assist in removal of dirt and carbon buildup. Ensure the decocking safety lever, breech face, slide guides, and extractor are free of dirt and residue. Finally, wipe the slide assembly dry with a cloth and apply a light coat of CLP or LSA. To clean the barrel, place RBC or CLP on the bore brush. Insert the bore brush into the chamber end of the barrel, making sure it completely clears the muzzle before it is pulled back through the bore. Repeat several times to loosen carbon deposits. Dry the barrel by pushing a swab through the bore. Repeat as necessary until a clean swab can be observed. Clean the locking block with a soft brush. Finally, apply a light coat of CLP or LSA to the barrel bore, chamber area, and exterior surfaces of the barrel and locking block. Clean the recoil spring and recoil spring guide using CLP and a soft brush or cloth. After wiping these clean, apply a light coat of CLP or LSA. If the hammer should inadvertently be cocked while the slide is removed, do not allow the hammer to fall with full force by pulling the trigger, as damage to the receiver will occur. If necessary, the hammer must be manually lowered. To clean the receiver assembly, first wipe it with a clean cloth. Use a soft brush for those hard to clean areas. Pay special attention to the disassembly lever, trigger, slide stop, hammer and magazine release button. Finally, apply a light coat of CLP or LSA to the receiver. To clean the magazine assembly, first wipe the magazine tube and follower with a cloth. Then clean these with CLP and a soft brush. Again, using the cloth, wipe the magazine spring, floor plate retainer. Apply a light coat of CLP or LSA to these parts. If faults are found during inspection that you are not authorized to correct, inform your unit armor. To inspect the slide, first check for free movement of the decocking safety lever and push in on the firing pin block. Finally, check the rear sight for looseness. To inspect the barrel assembly, check the bore and chamber for pitting and obstructions. Check the locking block plunger for free movement of locking block. Lastly, check locking lugs and barrel lugs for cracks and burrs. To inspect the recoil spring and recoil spring guide, check the recoil spring for damage. Check for flat spots on the inner and outer surfaces. Check spring guide for straightness and smoothness. Check to be sure that it is free of cracks and burrs. Inspect the receiver assembly for bends, chips, and cracks. Check for free movement of the slide stop and magazine catch. Check guide rails for excessive wear, burrs, cracks, or chips. To inspect the magazine, check for spring and follower damage. Ensure that the lips of the magazine are not excessively bent and are free of cracks and burrs. The magazine tube should not be bent or dirty. Insert the recoil spring guide into the recoil spring and lay it down. Grasp the slide assembly with the bottom facing up. With the other hand, grasp the barrel assembly with the locking block facing up. Insert the muzzle of the barrel assembly into the forward open end of the slide. At the same time, lower the rear of the barrel assembly by aligning the extractor cutout with the extractor. The locking block will fall into the lock position in the slide. Pick up the assembled recoil spring and recoil spring guide. During spring insertion, spring tension must be maintained until the spring guide is fully seated onto the cutaway located on the locking block. Insert the end of the recoil spring and recoil spring guide into the recoil spring housing. At the same time, Compress the recoil spring and lower the recoil spring guide until it is fully seated onto the locking block cutaway. To ensure that the recoil spring and recoil spring guide does not jar loose and cause injury or damage, wrap your fingers around the forward slide and barrel assembly. Be sure the hammer is not cocked. If the hammer is cocked, carefully lower the hammer manually. Do not pull the trigger while placing the slide onto the receiver. Still grasping the slide assembly, rotate it until the sights are facing up. Align the slide onto the receiver assembly guide rails. Push until the rear of the slide is a short distance beyond the rear of the receiver assembly and hold it in place. Rotate the disassembly latch lever upward. A click indicates a positive lock. Release the slide assembly and it will stop in the proper position. To assemble the magazine, insert the follower into the top coil of the magazine spring. The top coil has an upward and forward pointed end. Pick up the magazine tube and ensure that the notches on the follower and the magazine tube are on the same side. Do not place the lips of the magazine tube on a hard surface during assembly, since damage could occur. Insert the magazine spring with the follower into the magazine tube. Turn the magazine bottom up with the backside against the palm of the hand. Attach and center the floor plate retainer to the bottom of the spring coil. The rounded ends of the floor plate retainer must be on the same side as those on the magazine tube. After inserting the spring into the magazine tube, you must maintain tension on the spring with your thumb. Push and hold down the spring and floor plate retainer. Slide the floor plate over the magazine sidewalls until fully seated. This will be indicated by a click. Insert the magazine assembly into the magazine well of the pistol. Carefully. A click indicates the lock position. Depress the slide stop. Insert an empty magazine into the pistol and ensure that the magazine catch locks the magazine in place. Retract the slide and release it. The magazine follower should push up on the slide stop, locking the slide to the rear. Depress the magazine release button and remove the magazine. Rotate the decocking safety lever to the safe or down position. Depress the slide stop, allowing the slide to return fully forward. At the same time, the hammer should fall to the fully forward position. Squeeze and release the trigger. The firing pin block should move up and down. The hammer should not move. Rotate the decocking safety lever in the fire or up position. Squeeze the trigger to check double action. The firing pin block should move up and down. The hammer should cock to the rear and fall forward. Squeeze the trigger again and hold it to the rear. Manually retract and release the slide while holding the trigger to the rear. Release the trigger. A click should be heard and the hammer should not fall. Squeeze the trigger to check single action. The hammer should fall. If the safety function checks are performed as indicated, the pistol is mission ready. If one or more of these checks do not perform as indicated, inform your unit armor. This concludes the operator level presentation on the M9 pistol.
We will first start with the barrel assembly. Detailed disassembly of the barrel assembly is simple and quick, and should be done like this. First, place the barrel assembly on a soft surface. With a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap out the locking block plunger spring pin. Remove the locking block plunger from the rear of the barrel. Remove the locking block by sliding the locking block out from either side of the retaining knot. Pause tape. To clean and lubricate the barrel assembly. For purposes of this film, Cleaning and lubricating the M9 pistol will not be shown. For hard-to-clean areas on the M9, use the cleaning brush, better known as the toothbrush. The bore brush is for cleaning the bore and chamber only. Use of the bore brush on any other part of the pistol will damage the protective finish. Remove dirt and corrosion from powder-fouled parts with a wiping rag dampened with CLP. If necessary, apply RBC on the bore brush to clean the bore and chamber. Ensure that the bore brush passes completely through the bore before drawing the brush back. Lightly oil with CLP or LSA. To inspect and repair the barrel assembly, perform the following. Inspect the entire exterior surface of the barrel for cracks, particularly in front of the barrel lugs. If cracks are visible to the naked eye, replace the barrel. Inspect the internal surfaces of the bore and chamber for cracks, chipping, and excessive pitting. If pitting in the bore area exceeds 1 land in width and 3/8 inch in length, replace the barrel. If a honing stone is used to remove burrs or sharp edges, extreme care must be taken to maintain the original shape or design. The feed ramp should be free of burrs and sharp edges. If burred, polish with crocus cloth and/or a honing stone. Inspect the locking block and locking block lugs for cracks using inspection penetrant. If cracks are found, replace the locking block. The locking block plunger should be free of burrs, cracks, and chips. If damage cannot be corrected, replace the locking block plunger. To reassemble the barrel assembly, slide the locking block into the retaining notch from either the left or right side and center it. Insert the curved or pointed end of the locking block plunger into the rear of the barrel. The cutaway section of the plunger should face towards the chamber. Using a 1/16 inch punch, align the plunger cutaway with the spring pin hole. With the barrel resting on a soft surface, lightly tap the locking block plunger spring pin in until slightly below flush. After installation, the locking block plunger spring pin should not protrude from either side. Pause tape. In order to disassemble the slide assembly, place the slide assembly on the left or right side with the decocking safety lever over the edge of a soft support. With a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap out the firing pin block spring pin. Pause tape. The firing pin block is under spring tension. When removing the punch, maintain slight pressure on the bottom of the firing pin block. Be careful not to lose the firing pin block spring during removal. With your forefinger, push in slightly on the bottom side of the firing pin block. Remove the 1/16 inch punch from the firing pin block pin hole. Slowly release the pressure on the firing pin block. Remove the firing pin block and firing pin block spring from the cavity. Pause tape. In order to remove the spring pins from the right safety lever wing, the decocking safety lever must be in the safe or down position. The right safety lever wing must remain with the decocking safety lever as these are a matched set. These are not interchangeable with other pistols. Place the slide on a soft support with the sights up. With a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap out both right safety lever spring pins. Remove the right safety lever wing. Pause tape. The trigger bar detent and the left safety detent are under spring tension. The palms of both hands should be used when removing the decocking safety lever from the slide to prevent loss of detents and springs. Rotate the decocking safety lever to the fire or up position. With a punch, push in on the rear of the firing pin striker and rotate the decocking safety lever up past the fire position until a click is heard and hold. Pause tape. Carefully push in on the right side of the decocking safety lever while maintaining control of the detents and springs. Remove both detents and springs. Remove the decocking safety lever and the firing pin striker from the slide. Remove the firing pin striker from the decocking safety lever. Pause tape. Place the slide on a soft support with the sights down so the headed extractor pin can be tapped out. With a 3/32 inch punch, lightly tap out the headed extractor pin downward at a slight angle. With a pair of pliers, carefully pull the headed extractor pin from the slide while maintaining slight pressure on the rear of the extractor. When releasing pressure from the rear of the extractor, ensure the rear of the slide is covered to prevent ejection of the firing pin and the firing pin spring. Remove the extractor and extractor spring from the slide. Remove the firing pin and firing pin spring by elevating the muzzle end of the slide. Pause tape. Removal of the rear sight is authorized only when replacement is required. Because the rear sight can be damaged when removed, you will not be shown how to replace the rear sight in this film. Refer to your 23&P technical manual for the proper procedures. To clean and lubricate the slide assembly. Remove dirt and corrosion from powder-fouled parts with a wiping rag dampened in CLP or RBC. Lightly lubricate with CLP or LSA after cleaning. To inspect and repair the slide assembly. If a honing stone is used to remove burrs or sharp edges, care must be taken to maintain original shape or design. Inspect the slide for burrs or chips on contact surfaces. Polish with crocus cloth or use a honing stone if necessary. Inspect the slide for cracks using inspection penetrant. Inspect the firing pin for mushrooming, pitting, or cracks. If necessary, replace it. The firing pin spring should not be bent or broken. If it is, replace it. Check the rear sight for looseness upon reassembly. If loose, replace with another sight using the procedures detailed in the 23&P technical manual. The decocking safety lever should not be bent or burred. If bent, replace. If burred, polish with crocus cloth. Detents and springs should not be bent or broken. Replace if they are bent or broken. The extractor hook should not be burred or broken. If it is broken, replace it. The breech face should be smooth with no burrs. If burred, polish with crocus cloth. All parts should have a dull black finish except for the firing pin and springs. The external surface finish is critical. If shiny surfaces exist, use solid film lubricant. To reassemble the slide assembly, place the firing pin spring onto the forward portion of the firing pin. When inserting the firing pin block cutout in the firing pin must be aligned to the proper angle with the firing pin block cutout of the slide facing to the right. Insert the firing pin and the firing pin spring into the rear of the slide with the cutout facing to the right. Pause tape. Insert the firing pin block upside down into the firing pin block cutout in the top of the slide. This will ensure that the cutout of the firing pin is aligned with the extractor retaining pinhole. With a punch, push in on the firing pin. Insert the extractor spring into the extractor spring recess hole. Insert the extractor into the extractor cutout. While maintaining pressure on the rear of the extractor, insert and push the headed extractor pin into the headed extractor pin hole until it engages and retains the extractor. Pause tape. With a 3/32 inch punch, lightly tap the headed extractor pin in until seated. Lightly stake the headed extractor pin in the top of the slide. Pause tape. Remove the firing pin block from the firing pin block cutout. Check the extractor to see that it is under spring tension. Pause tape. Pick up the firing pin striker and the safety decocking lever and insert the firing pin striker into the decocking safety lever. The trigger bar detent spring and firing pin block spring are interchangeable. The safety detent spring is slightly larger than the trigger bar detent and firing pin block springs. Pre-position the smaller trigger bar detent and 7/16 inch long spring into the trigger bar detent retaining hole. Also, pre-position the safety detent and the 1/2 inch long spring into the decocking safety lever. Pause tape. Insert the decocking safety lever into the slide with the safety wing slightly above the fire or up position. Ensure the rear of the striker is flush with the rear of the decocking safety lever. Push the decocking safety lever in until it contacts the trigger bar detent and spring. With a punch, push downward on the trigger bar detent and spring. While maintaining pressure on the trigger bar detent, push the decocking safety lever over the top of the detent. With a punch, push in on the safety detent and spring, and at the same time, push the decocking safety lever all the way to the right until seated. Then rotate the decocking safety lever to the safe or down position. Pause tape. Pick up and insert the right safety wing onto the decocking safety lever and align the holes with a 1/16 inch punch. Lightly tap both 1/4 inch long spring pins in from the top until slightly below flush. Make sure the pins do not protrude through the bottom or top of the decocking safety lever. Rotate the decocking safety lever to ensure that it moves freely and is retained in both the safe or down and fire or up positions. Pause tape. Rotate the slide with the sights down and carefully seat the 7/16 inch long firing pin block spring into the recess hole. Insert the firing pin block into the firing pin block cutout. With your forefinger, push in on the firing pin block and place the slide on its side. With a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap the firing pin block spring pin in until slightly below flush. Ensure that the firing pin block spring pin does not protrude from either side of the slide. Using this punch, push the firing pin block upward, ensuring that it moves freely under spring tension. Pause tape. To disassemble the receiver assembly. To prevent loss of the disassembly button and spring, be sure to release button pressure slowly after removing the disassembly latch lever. Push in on the disassembly latch button and rotate the disassembly latch lever upward until contacting the slide rail. While maintaining firm pressure on the disassembly latch button, pull out and rotate it upward to remove the disassembly latch lever. Remove the disassembly latch button and spring. Pause tape. Place the receiver on the left side. Locate the trigger bar spring just below the trigger bar. With the tip of a fingernail, screwdriver, or needle nose pliers, carefully unseat the upper portion of the trigger bar spring from the trigger bar. Gently lift up and remove the trigger bar spring from the hole in the receiver. To remove the trigger bar, unseat the trigger bar by inserting your forefinger into the receiver and pushing outward on the trigger bar. Then pull the trigger bar out from the right side of the receiver. Pause tape. Turn the receiver over and rotate the slide stop slightly upward and pull out until the slide stop can rotate freely downward. Remove the slide stop and slide stop spring. Cover the top of the trigger cavity to prevent ejection or loss of the trigger spring, or possible injury to personnel during removal of the trigger pin. With a 3/32 inch punch, push the headed trigger pin out from right to left. The trigger spring may have a bent leg on one or both ends. To remove the trigger and the trigger spring, push upward on the trigger and pull out. Pause tape. Two different types of pins can retain the lanyard loop, a spring pin or a shouldered straight pin. The spring pin has a hole through it, and the shouldered straight pin is solid. To remove the lanyard loop spring pin. During removal of the lanyard loop spring pin, be sure the punch is left in place to prevent accidental loss of parts or injury to personnel. Ensure that the hammer is in the down or forward position. With the 1/8 inch punch, drive out the lanyard loop spring pin, leaving the punch in place. Place the lanyard loop on a soft support and push down firmly on the top of the receiver to overcome the mainspring tension. While maintaining this downward pressure, remove the punch and slowly release the pressure to remove the lanyard loop and the mainspring. Pause tape. To remove the lanyard loop shouldered straight pin. During removal of the shouldered straight pin, carefully allow the mainspring to expand to prevent injury to personnel or accidental loss of parts. Ensure the hammer is in the down or forward position. Hold the pistol in a horizontal position with the bottom of the receiver against the edge of a table. Press in on the lanyard loop using a pumping action. The shouldered straight pin will fall free from the receiver. Carefully allow the mainspring to expand to its free length. Pause tape. Using a 1/8 inch punch, remove the headed hammer pin by pushing out from right to left. Lift up and remove the hammer from the receiver. Rotate the receiver upside down to allow the hammer strut to fall free. Pause tape. During removal of the sear pin, use your finger to maintain control of the sear spring to prevent ejection and or loss. With a 3/32 inch punch, push the sear pin out of the sear pin hole. Rotate the receiver to allow the sear and the sear spring to fall free. Pause tape. Place the receiver on its left side and, with a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap out the headed straight pin from right to left. Remove the hammer release lever and firing pin block lever. With a 1/16 inch punch, lightly tap out the ejector spring pin from right to left and remove the ejector. Pause tape. During removal of the grip screw bushings from the right side of the receiver, be sure the slide stop is removed from the receiver to prevent possible damage. Removal of the grip screw bushings is authorized only when replacement is required. Therefore, only observe the following procedures. Do not perform these actions unless a bushing is damaged and must be replaced. Remove a damaged grip screw bushing by using an electric drill with an 1/8 inch drill bit. Drill through the center of the bushing. Insert a number 1 easy out extractor into the 1/8 inch hole. With a small hammer, firmly tap the easy out extractor into the bushing. Using an adjustable open-end wrench, carefully and slowly turn the easy out extractor in a counterclockwise direction and remove the bushing. After the bushing is removed, clean out the internal threads in the receiver with a toothbrush. Pause tape. To clean and lubricate the receiver and its parts. Remove dirt and corrosion from powder-fouled parts with a wiping rag dampened in CLP. Lightly lubricate with CLP or LSA after cleaning. To inspect and repair the receiver. Check the receiver for distortion and burrs. If the receiver is distorted, the receiver is unserviceable. If a honing stone is used to remove burrs or sharp edges, care must be taken to maintain the original shape or design. Remove burrs from parts with a fine honing stone or crocus cloth. Check pins for distortion, cracks, or excessive wear. Replace if distorted, cracked, or excessively worn. Check springs for breaks, cracks, or distortion. The free length of the mainspring will not be less than 2 inches. Replace broken, cracked, or permanently set springs. Also, if the main spring is less than 2 inches, replace it. Check the receiver rails and receiver with inspection penetrant. If cracks are detected, the receiver is unserviceable. The external surface finish is critical. If shiny surfaces exist, use solid film lubricant. Follow these procedures to reassemble the receiver. Removal of the grip screw bushing is authorized only when replacement is required. Therefore, only observe the following procedures. Do not perform these actions unless a bushing is damaged and must be replaced. The tip of a screwdriver should be modified to fit the slot on the replacement grip screw bushing. With the modified screwdriver, slowly screw the replacement grip screw bushing into the receiver. Tighten the grip screw bushing until snug. Insert the fabricated staking tool into the magazine well window. At the same time, center the staking point and recessed area of the cap screw onto the bushing. Using a 3/8 inch torque wrench, carefully torque the cap screw to between 100 to 105 inch-pounds. To reverse the magazine catch assembly, install the button on the opposite side. To install the magazine catch assembly, insert the magazine catch assembly through the magazine well window at an angle. The long bushing of the magazine catch assembly must catch on the edge of the magazine catch assembly cutout. At the same time, push in on the flat side of the magazine catch assembly and push down to seat. Pause tape. Install the ejector with the pointed or notched end forward and align the ejector pin hole with a 1/16 inch punch. Lightly tap the ejector spring pin in until slightly below flush. The ejector spring pin should not protrude from either side of the receiver rails. Pause tape. To install the hammer release lever and the firing pin block lever, pre-position the headed straight pin into the left side of the receiver. Position the hammer release lever with the curved arm pointing up and to the rear. Then push the headed straight pin in until it holds the hammer release lever in position. Insert the firing pin block lever with the bent foot extending through the upper magazine well window cutout. Carefully align the firing pin block lever hole with a punch and lightly tap in the headed straight pin and stake. Always stake in the center of the rail at the 9 or 3 o'clock position. Check that both the hammer release lever and the firing pin block lever pivot freely. Pause tape. Pre-position the sear pin into the right side of the receiver with the muzzle end of the receiver facing upward. Insert the sear with the flat side up through the magazine well window. Slide the sear towards the ejector and lower the sear into the sear cutout, aligning the hole in the sear with the hole in the receiver. At the same time, push the sear pin in until it holds the sear in position. Install the sear spring with the short leg towards the ejector and the curved portion of the spring coil facing towards the magazine well. With a punch, push down on the spring coil and at the same time push in the sear pin. Pause tape. Be sure the straight end of the hammer strut is down and the curved or rounded end is facing to the rear. Insert the rounded end of the hammer strut into the recess in the hammer. With the receiver resting on the right side, insert the hammer and hammer strut into the hammer cavity. Align the hammer with the hole in the receiver and insert the straight-headed hammer pin into the left side of the receiver until seated. Pause tape. Rotate the receiver until the bottom of the magazine well faces upward. Insert the mainspring into the bottom of the mainspring cavity and carefully align the mainspring onto the hammer strut. Two different designs of the lanyard loop support the mainspring in the receiver. One lanyard loop is symmetrical and the other is not. Two different types of pins can retain the lanyard loop, a spring pin or a shouldered straight pin. The spring pin has a hole through it, and the shouldered straight pin is solid. The shoulder straight pin is the preferred replacement part. To reassemble the lanyard loop spring pin, follow these procedures. Downward pressure must be maintained on the lanyard loop to overcome the mainspring pressure. An 1/8 inch punch should be used to align the lanyard loop spring pin hole with the hole in the receiver. This will allow alignment of the lanyard loop spring pin during installation. Ensure the hammer is in the down or forward position. The non-symmetrical lanyard loop must be installed into the main spring cavity with the cutout forward. The symmetrical lanyard loop can be installed either way. Install the lanyard loop into the mainspring cavity with the cutout forward. Rotate the receiver and rest the lanyard loop on a soft support. Compress the mainspring by pushing down on the receiver. At the same time, insert an 1/8 inch punch to align the lanyard loop spring pin with the lanyard loop spring pin hole. Drive the lanyard loop spring pin in until slightly below flush. This pin should not protrude from either side. Pause tape. The lanyard loop shouldered straight pin is the preferred replacement part. Follow these procedures to reassemble the shouldered straight pin. Ensure the hammer is in the down or forward position. With the bottom of the magazine well facing upward, insert the mainspring into the bottom of the mainspring cavity. Carefully align the mainspring onto the hammer strut. Install the lanyard loop into the mainspring cavity. Rotate the receiver and rest the lanyard loop against a soft support. Compress the mainspring by pushing in on the receiver. At the same time, align the shouldered straight pin with the lanyard loop pinhole and push the shouldered straight pin in until slightly below flush. If correctly installed, the shouldered straight pin will not protrude from either side of the receiver. Pause tape. Install the trigger into the trigger cavity by aligning the lower hole of the trigger with the hole in the receiver. Insert the trigger pin into the left side of the receiver until it holds the trigger in position. On the right side, insert the trigger bar post through the oval slot into the trigger bar post hole of the trigger. At the same time, insert the trigger bar lug into the trigger bar lug cutout of the receiver. When applying pressure to the center or coil area of the trigger spring, use care to prevent ejection of the trigger spring, as it could become lost or cause injury to personnel. one or both ends of the trigger spring may be bent. If both ends of the trigger spring are bent, the following step still applies. Using needle nose pliers, grasp the trigger spring in the center, or the coil area, with the straight leg of the spring forward, and the bent leg facing down and to the rear. Lower the trigger spring into the trigger spring cutout, ensuring that the bent leg of the trigger spring is resting on top of the trigger bar post. With a screwdriver, push down on the center or coil area, and at the same time, push the trigger pin in until seated. Pause tape. Install the 90-degree angle end of the trigger bar spring into the trigger bar spring retaining hole in the receiver. Then, insert the rounded loop end of the trigger bar spring into the trigger bar spring groove of the receiver. With a screwdriver or fingernail, pull down and insert the slightly curved end of the trigger bar spring into the bottom groove of the trigger bar. Pause tape. Install the slide stop spring onto the slide stop post with the straight leg resting in the slide stop spring cutout and the bent leg pointing down. Insert the bent leg of the slide stop spring into the forward slide stop cutout hole. At the same time, insert the slide stop post into the slide stop hole of the receiver. Then, rotate the slide stop slightly upward and push in until seated. Ensure the bent leg of the slide stop spring retains the trigger pin after installation. Pause tape. Damage will occur from over-tightening the grip screws. Tighten grip screws only until snug. Install the left and right pistol grips, lock washers, and grip screws one at a time. Tighten only until snug. Pause tape. Install the disassembly button spring into the spring recess hole. Insert the disassembly button aligning the disassembly button spring into the disassembly button recess. With the forefinger, firmly push in on the disassembly button. At the same time, insert the disassembly lever with the wing pointing upward into the disassembly lever hole of the receiver. While maintaining firm pressure on the disassembly button, rotate the disassembly lever rearward and down until seated. Insert the barrel assembly into the slide assembly as previously instructed. And place and lock the slide and barrel assembly onto the receiver assembly. And most importantly, perform the safety function checks as previously shown in the first tape.